Welcome. Thanks for coming out on this chilly January night and joining us for our program. Just a few introductions. We have some people I know from out of the county, so special welcome to those of you from other counties in Minnesota. I'm Cam Erickson, the director here, and this is Bill Eckersen. He's our collections manager. Sharon Ehlers is our office reception guest services person and does a wonderful job welcoming people. And we're especially glad to have our work study student that's worked here since September. Since fall, we'll just say fall. Christian Deiterich back there. Okay. So we're gonna probably clap one more time because I'm gonna tell you something about Christian. I asked his permission to tell something really cool about him. He made history at the University of Minnesota-Morris this fall football season. He is the first UMM Cougar football player to be on the first team of the all-region UMAC football. So he's an offensive lineman and he's on the blind side of the quarterback. Am I correct? And did not allow one sack all season for that side. Is that also correct? I believe. Well, that's what the newspaper said. So we always believe every word in the newspaper, right? So anyway, we're glad to have him working at the museum, and we're glad that he is willing to be a part of this program tonight. So we just picked out some topics that we find interesting. Some of them we don't know enough about to have a full exhibit. Some of them maybe you've seen or heard about some places, but we hope you learn some new tidbits about some things in our county's history. And we know there's a few of you that everything will be new because you aren't from this county, so you probably don't know most of this. So Bill is going to start us off.
All right, thank you, Cam. Well, our topic is going to be about the poorhouse, and I remember the old saying when, Mom and Dad got an expense they didn't expect. They'd say, "You're going to send me to the poorhouse," and I didn't realize that there was such a thing. I thought it was just some kind of a saying. And Stevens County had a poorhouse. It was part of America's relief system for the poor and the needy at that time. It was rooted in the English system. It goes all the way back to Henry VIII. Minnesota's early relief system established that the county was responsible for taking care of the needy. And that was then amended a couple of years later after statehood to the township was supposed to take care of the needy. Well, they changed their mind again a couple of years later and decided, yeah, it's the county. And they also gave them the option to have a poorhouse or a poor farm. Well, who was a poor person under the law? Well, they were defined as any person not earning a living due to bodily infirmity, idiocy, lunacy, or other cause, and whose immediate family were unable to support them. So if you had relatives, you were responsible. And to receive aid, poor person, you didn't just go sign up at the poorhouse. You actually had to declare yourself as a poor person, make an application to the county commissioners, and then establish that you were a resident for at least 1 year. Minors, if there were minors, let's say a mother lost the breadwinner, the minors would be sent out as an apprentice. That was changed in 1905, though, and minors were instead sent to a home. Well, support for the poorhouse goes back to 1882. There was an editorial in the Morris Tribune that supported having a poor farm to support the needy people in the county. 60 of the 87 counties in Minnesota had poor farms. In 1884, Stevens County was actually thinking about doing it. They brought it up at a county commissioner meeting, and Michael Finnegan, R.J. Hall, and J.J. Helgeson were talking about finding property for sale to locate the poor farm. The board shelved the idea, though, when they would talk to the chair of the State Board of Corrections and Charities, who advised them against the idea since the county wasn't large enough. Well, the idea came up again, and there's really nothing that we can say why it came up again, but in 1895, the county commissioners decided to buy one. And the commissioners settled on a poor farm on 160 acres here in Pepperton Township. So if you know your directions here, this is County Road 14 that goes through here, and County Road 9 goes down through here. And there, again, this is County Road 14 that goes right past here. This is the Big Muddy that goes down through here, and it has since kind of straightened out a little bit. Well, the farm was supposed to be self-sufficient and provide work for what they called inmates on the farm, and there was, and the superintendent made a living farming the land. And if we take a look at what they settled on here, they built this house here. This is the south end of the poor farm. Here's the floor plan. So you've got living room up here and a bedroom, and also there was a room upstairs for the superintendent, and then a community dining room and kitchen and a couple of bedrooms here again for the superintendent. Most of the inmates, though, spent their time upstairs. There's really no pictures of the poor farm when it was in operation. The pictures that I was able to find were from Michael Satzer, who grew up on, who bought the poor farm, and his son Bill put together a biography about living on the poor farm. So here we're looking at the north end of the house, and here's the front of the house, the south end of it, and somebody posing for a nice picture on a summer day. There's the barn. They had a barn, they had a granary, and they had a machine shed. They had a heating plant at one time that was built in 1904, and they also got telephone service by 1904. Here's the granary and windmill behind. There's the wife, Mrs. Michael Satzer, and son. And here's what it looks like now. The house was moved in 1945 to Chicago and sold to Art Johnson, a Minneapolis Moline dealer, and he used it as a shop. In 1964, Gerhard Busch bought the building, using part of it for living quarters, and the rest of it he used for his Busch plumbing and heating. Living on the poor farm was a situation of last resort. It was shameful to live at the poor farm, and even people that were declared poor asked to live in town with families, and the county still contracted with families in town to support people. The superintendent was responsible for farming the land. He raised the livestock, and the money that was raised from the crops that he raised was given to the county. Money needed for maintaining the farm was given to the farmer from the county, and the superintendent earned a salary. The superintendent's wife was responsible for keeping the house clean. She also provided clean bedding and clothes for the inmates, and she also fed the inmates, hired a girl to help with the chores as well. The inmates themselves, they couldn't really help because they were in tough shape. They, in many cases, couldn't do anything more than maybe some farming or some gardening. And the first superintendent was John H. Murray. He was hired in 1896 and continued working till 1904. And then in 1905, John Beater had a bid for a position, and he offered to do the work and also furnish the horses for $600. But if he didn't furnish the horses, he was going to get $500. In 1906, the third of the three, John Litschauer, was hired for a $500 salary, and he later earned a bonus of $150 a year for making the farm self-sustaining, and that only happened in 2 years, in 1908 and 1909. Well, that's the county commissioners. They sold the farm in 1910. They decided to close it up. People complained about the cost to the county. They didn't say anything about the conditions for the poor, but they were concerned about the cost, and so they sold it and then contracted with people in town to take care of the needy. And the farm sold for $16,000, 320 acres, and then they also sold the animals and the machinery for $5,000. Well, the issue of county and township support didn't go away. In 1916, they put it on the ballot. Shall the system of caring for the poor of Stevens County be changed from county to township plan? Well, it passed by a 2-to-1 margin that they would keep it as a county responsibility. And it came up again even as late as 1930. Shall the county of Stevens in the state of Minnesota change its present method of taking care of its county poor from the present county system to the former township system? And again, they kept it in a county responsibility by a score of 1,251 to 1,095. So this was kind of the early welfare system of today. A lot of the welfare services went by the wayside as hospitals for veterans came into use because those vets didn't need the services. State Hospital at Fergus Falls or Wilmer, St. Peter, they took care of that group, and then nursing homes came into existence, and they started taking care of those people. So the county's role became smaller and smaller. That's a quick look at the poorhouse.
And now we'll go to a little bit of a lighter topic then, but thank you, Bill. That was very interesting. Oh, wrong way. Did you know that Stevens County had a thriving frog industry over 100 years ago? Now, if any of you are on Facebook, you maybe saw that picture last week sometime on Facebook, and we mentioned that we were going to talk about that. So here we are. So we don't have a lot of information on why this, how it got started necessarily. But in the Morris Tribune on November 29th, 1918, is the first article that we see about, it happens to be Milton and John Jackson, and they're brothers. And the nearest we can figure, they had a frog business for 5 to 6 years. So we'll find out later why we think it had to have been about that. One thing we found out from John's wife's obituary is that John had a tiling and ditching business around Morris. So if you think about that, tiling and ditching, you might run into a frog or two, and then all of a sudden you're like, tell your brother, there's frogs all over the place. We gotta. So this is pretty small print over here. So I'm gonna read this to you because it's pretty intriguing. The Jackson brothers of Morris are, this is a keyword, again, we don't know why it would say that. They are again in the frog business. So I don't know if we don't know if they were in it, went out of it, and back in, who knows. They are busy catching the frogs to ship to market. St. Paul and Minneapolis are the largest frog markets in the world. And the frog catchers of the state bring about 500,000 dozen to the market yearly. That's a lot of frogs. Many of them coming from Stevens County. 5 years ago, no frogs were shipped out of Minnesota. So that would be like 1913 they're talking about. Now the business amounts to more than $100,000 a year, And in today's dollar, that's 2.2 million. There are no frogs like the Minnesota product for the epicure. I love the vocabulary they used back then. This is attributed to the clear, cool water that is found in Minnesota's 10,000 lakes in which the frogs live and have their nests. Frogs' legs are purchased all through the state by shippers from the two cities. So perhaps these guys had it as a side gig. Maybe Milton did it full time, who knows? Some of those are questions we can't tell. But 4 years later, we have some frog theft going on here. Mr. L.D. Baker and Ralph Anderson, who were arrested Monday by Sheriff Zoll, charged with stealing more than 600 pounds of live frogs from Milton Jackson, appeared before the judge late Thursday. It's alleged that the two men stole the frogs on Saturday or Sunday night 2 weeks ago. The two men were confined to the county jail, so we also can learn that at that time they had a county jail. Approximately 500 pounds of live frogs were found at the Earl Baker Farm, 3 miles southeast of Morris, where these two men were staying at the time of their arrest. It is alleged that the two men had already shipped 100 pounds of dressed frogs to a Chicago market from Hancock. According to the complaint, the frogs were stolen from the tanks of Milton Jackson in the Pomme de Terre River northeast of Morris. The value of the stolen frogs was said to be approximately $300. And that's about the last we see of it in any papers. So just the things that you pull out of these papers and the intriguing stories. Please don't ask any more questions about it, because this is about all we know. And I'm going to turn it over to Christian.
Hi. So I'm doing the Stones Mill Dam, or also known as the Pomme de Terre Dam. Oh, I went the wrong way too. So the Stones Mill Dam was made by H.W. Stone. He was a really important settler of Morris. It was built in about 1879 for about $9,000, which today is about $285,000. This was the first grain mill in Morris and presumed to be the first grain mill just in the area. So it's kind of hard to see, but the only thing I had to work with was like a glass negative. And so that right there is H.W. Stone in what was the grain mill, but it eventually burned down. But I'll talk about that a little bit more. Oh, sorry. My bad. So 5 years later, it was turned into a roller mill, making nearly like 100 barrels of flour a day. This was presumably like fantastic flour. Mr. Stone brought it to the Chicago World's Fair to show off his flour, and it was in the newspapers that it was just excellent quality flour. It was going really well and it was making a ton of money until about April 16th of 1908 when Mrs. Stone woke up to it on fire, which they thought probably happened from a lit torch or lantern from a fisherman that was fishing nearby. Tried to get it out, didn't work, everything burnt down. For insurance, he was given $9,000 for the building itself and $1,000 for grain, in total being about $34,000 for the building and about $1,000, or a little over $1,000 for the grain, sorry. After a bit, the dam burst just because nobody could really maintain it. And that's really all that is said about the Stones Mill. But a little bit of fun fact about H.W. Stone. He was a representative in our district for the legislature, and he also is said to have brought red-polled cattle to the area. So nothing really happened with this dam from about 1908 to 1934 when the Morris Rifle and Pistol Association started talking about trying to do a conservation effort to put a dam there to bring a lake for the people of Morris. This person here is Dr. Ederer, who was the conservation officer at the time, who really just spearheaded this whole thing. And then this is a picture of the Kiwanis Club, but there was no pictures of the Morris Rifle and Pistol Association. And a lot of these people were in that same association regardless. So again, they wanted to talk about, or wanted to get the dam for a few reasons, mainly for recreation, like swimming, fishing, and hunting, since they wanted to have it for fish population and waterfowl population, and people wanted something to do in the small town of Morris. And they found this as a really good spot since Mr. Stone's dam was kind of still there, and it was also an area that had previously been a lake, but through droughts eventually just turned to a creek. They had a whole bunch of maps built, or maps made and sent over to the state, who looked over it, sent over inspectors, talking about what they needed to do to build this. They combined it with the Lac-Aparel Dam so that the government would hopefully give more money and approve it faster, because of Lac-Aparel Dam was badly needed for this area. When the inspectors went there, they saw that it was still flowing a little bit, which a lot of these dam projects got canceled because there was no river there anymore. They had yeah, I was writing this to hopefully not do that, but I knew it was going to happen eventually, and I just had to get it out of the way. Kept bouncing over words. So, a lot of these got canceled because with a drought in about 1934, none of these rivers existed, but they were still asking the government to try to build a dam for them to bring the rivers back. So they were lucky that there was still a small river there, and that a lot of these jobs would be very important for the area since we're in a depression at the time, so they approved it. A few weeks later, the governor of Minnesota came and talked a little bit and went to the site of the dam and basically gave his full approval, which they thought was gonna kind of expedite the process and get it really far into it. It didn't at all. It took about 3 or 4 months until they even got people to come out and look at it. And about November 30th of 1935, they were told that a different project in Morris, the Coleman Slough, was approved but not Pomme de Terre, which they had truthfully no idea why until about March of the next year, when they told them that they needed to change the bridge, that it wasn't a good enough grade. They needed to move the sewer system, because if they built the dam the place that it was, the sewage would get caught in the dam. So they needed to move that behind the dam, and they needed to make the dam bigger. They originally had it planned to be 76 feet long, with 9 feet tall from the riverbed, with removable logs to kind of control the river to make sure that we can keep the lake that we have now, and that if it eventually had another drought, we could keep it with water. So they started kind of looking at this and having more inspectors go, and realized that it wouldn't be big enough, that with the water that was going to happen, they were going to need a bigger dam. And so they extended it to 110 feet long, adding this spillway here. So they kept the original 67 with logs to control the water, and then a walkway to put the logs in. This was made for about $12,000 in total, $9,000 of it for materials, about $4,000 of it for, or $3,000 of it for labor, which was about $214,000 today. Actually, sorry, $300,000. Sorry, I read that wrong. So they thought, hearing all of this, building would start a little bit faster, but again, it didn't. Building didn't really start until January 2nd, when they hired 27 men to dig out the river and to change the flow so that they could build this dam. It was slowed by harsh winter, and so they added about 25 more men, putting it about 52, and working 2 6-hour shifts a day. This happened with the other changes, like the sewage and the bridge, which they held a town meeting to figure out what they were going to do about the whole sewage problem and that they needed to move it. So they passed like a little law saying that if the dam was approved, that they would buy the tile and move the sewer, which surprisingly, that's exactly what the state needed to hear, and went along with it. A few months later in September, there were some strikers that came from Montevideo, and they were going to these WPA projects and going worker by worker and trying to make them stop for pay raise. Pomme de Terre was the only one that actually got affected, and they stopped working. So they held a 2-week-long meeting, doing votes of who wanted to work, what wanted to happen. It was about a 50-50 of people wanting to work and not wanting to work. So what they did is they just let the people that wanted to do work, and they let go of all the rest of the people. So it just continued. And eventually, at the end of 1936, it was finished and created the lovely little lake that we have today, which should be the end of it. But on May 1st, tragedy struck when the first drowning happened. A raft fell over, did not survive. With this sad event, there was a large push for swimming lessons and the eventual lifeguard tower that they have with restrooms and dressing rooms coming in the months after, just for prevention. And that's all I have for the Pomme de Terre Dam.
Was the mill on the Dogs Park side or on the other side?
On the other side. So the mill would have been on this side of it.
No, but on which side of the road? You know, you have the dam.
Oh, sorry,
And then-
Dog Park. Yep.
All right, did you know that Morris wasn't even a decade old, and they got tied up in a international controversy? So we're going to take you back to 1880, and the town was drawn into a controversy about bringing Irish immigrants to the region. The southwest coastal county of Connemara was hit by a famine in 1878 and 1879, and you can see Connemara right here. And when the potato crop failed, people were starving. The sea kelp market tanked. Rents went unpaid. So, of course, the landlords started evicting people. That led to riots. So the situation led to Father Nugent of the Liverpool Relief Committee to reach out to Bishop John Ireland of Minnesota and the Catholic Colonization Bureau of St. Paul. Well, the two financed a relocation of 37 Connemara families to homesteads near Graceville. And they arrived in Boston on June 22nd, 1880, then boarded a train for a 3-day trip to St. Paul. Some members of the group stayed in the city as laborers and would later send money to the new farmers out in this part of the state. The rest boarded a train to the end of the tracks at Morris before taking wagons on the Wadsworth Trail to Moonshine Township in Big Stone County. So here you can see Chicago right here, Johnson, and Graceville. Each family was given 160 acres of virgin prairie, a cow, work implements, crop seed rather, and also given an account in Graceville for more supplies. And the group arrived at their new farms with the food and equipment, but most were laborers and took jobs with the railroad, which was still pushing west, headed toward Browns Valley, or they worked in Morris, where the wages were higher, which kind of brought some bad blood because the people in Graceville needed the laborers too. Winter of that 1880 came with a vengeance, and you might have seen this picture in our newsletter this month. On October 15th, they had a blizzard that was terrible, and this picture was taken south of Graceville, 130 miles. It comes from the book Forgetting Ireland, written by Bridget Conley. But October 15th, I don't think I've ever seen a blizzard anything like that. And these new immigrants weren't prepared for the prairie winter. There were doubts before they even got here that they were suitable for this northern climate. So there was bad publicity even before they got here. And rumors in Morris said that with this blizzard and the continued blizzards right into November and December, that there were people that were suffering on the Connemara colony. So the Morris Board of Trade, the business community of Morris, sent Henry Hutchins to investigate the condition of the Connemara. And he brought back a report. Hutchins was a contractor and a painter, and he found them starving and freezing. He wrote up a report that they put in the Morris Tribune, and this particular one says, "Next I found Coleman Malone, family of 8, son badly frozen, man worked 16 days for the priest Ryan, who promised him $1 per day and his dinner, but when work was done, only gave him a bag of cornmeal." Malone said, "We want something to eat and some fire." He has no shoes or boots. Wife and children are also barefoot, if you can imagine going through a blizzard barefoot. The man said, "Bishop Ireland gave me a ticket for a bag of meal. I took it to Father Ryan to get the meal. He tore it to pieces and gave me no meal." Mrs. Malone said, "I asked Father Ryan for shoes. He said, 'Go home. You need not come to Mass till fine weather.'" He talked to 18 different families. Another one was, I found on the second trip to the at-home Bartley McDonough, his daughter Bridget with both feet frozen. She was lying on the floor and her feet so swollen they somewhat resembled boxing gloves. This girl was in Graceville when they were there the first time, and her mother told us she was gone to beg the priest to send provisions and fuel to the family. She made that trip without shoes, froze her feet, and obtained nothing from the priest. These people are now supplied with provisions which will last them a week or 10 days. They have no fuel to speak of. Well, of course, this got people very upset. So the town of Morris sent supplies, and they sent quite a number of supplies, including 1,000 pounds of flour, 75 pounds of beef, sugar, tea, dried apples, clothing, and shoes. And later they were to send more quilts to keep people warm. The Morris report was sent to Governor Pillsbury, where the story was picked up by the Twin Cities papers, the St. Paul Pioneer Express, and the Minneapolis Tribune. And from there, of course, it spread worldwide. So the Catholic Church received a lot of heat from that. Bishop Ireland sent his own investigators and found that what the Irish immigrants told Hutchins was not true. and so there was bad blood about that, and we're just kind of glossing over most of this story. It's if you want to read a good version of the story, pick up Forgetting Ireland. It's available in paperback now, but she ties in a lot of things in that situation, like railroads going through. They were talking about a north-south route through Graceville, so there might have been some envy with the Morris business community having to compete with Graceville. And also there was the influence of the Pope. There's Lutherans over here, and they didn't want that popery. So there's a lot of things tied into this situation. Well, the other part of the story is that the Irish public television station came to western Minnesota to document the story in 1991. Joe Cook and his film crew spent 6 days interviewing descendants of the Connemara people still in the area. All but 3 families were shipped out after that winter of 1880-81. One of the interesting angles to the story is that the Irish researchers pointed out the irony of the Connemara, who had been pushed out of their native land, coming to occupy this land, and this land was used to be occupied by the Sisseton Lakota people, and so there was irony in that. In fact, the film spends about the first 10 minutes talking about that. They were, the film crew was surprised to find the original newspapers for the Morris Tribune at the library, and so they made use of that. They also interviewed a number of people, including Carol Day.
Since the Morris community was the closest large community to this new settlement, it became part of their mission to come to the rescue of these people. And there was a large part of our early history is the organization of relief for the Connemara folks that were stranded out on the prairie in the midst of bitter cold and deep snow and strong wind that they had never experienced before. I can only admire anyone who stayed on and continued, because certainly it was a way of life foreign to what they had known about in their home country.
And that was one of the things that I found in our collection. You can kind of see a subject that we deal with here at the museum, the quality of the video here. It was, I'm sure, sent to us originally on VCR and then transferred to DVD. And then who does anything with DVDs anymore? I had to find a program to rip it off the DVD and bring it to you here. So, but Joe Cook and his crew were treated very nicely, and they put about a 50-minute program together, and we have a copy downstairs.
Did you know that Morris was home to a thriving business that began with a problem of keeping socks up? So I don't know, you don't need to say out loud if you were in the era, and probably nobody was, because this is, you're too young, but in the 20s, 30s, the children wore long johns and long socks over the long johns, and the problem was that the socks would keep falling down. So, so we had a woman that lived in Morris that did something about this, and this is how the story goes. In 1931, David and Hazel Reiber moved to Morris with their 3 children. They lived in the apartment above the business that they ran, which is the same location as John's Total Entertainment on Atlantic Avenue. It's not that building because there was a fire in there, but it's in that same space. There used to be a 2-story building there. So the Reibers lived on the 2nd floor, and then Morris Variety Store was on the lower level, so they lived above their own business. And they had 3 children. And this was the early 30s when they had the long johns and the long stockings. And of course, Hazel Reiber was a creative, innovative lady, evidently, and she was determined that her kids' socks were not going to be around their ankles. So one day in 1934, Joan Reiber, one of the kids, she was probably about 4 or 5, was tumbling around the living room, and her dad, David, said, "Now wait a minute, she is like doing somersaults, cartwheels, jumping, and her socks are not coming down." And she was wearing her mom's latest creation of a garter to hold the socks up. And here it is. And it's got these little garter clips here. Here's the back. And that's one of the girls wearing it. It's not a great picture because she has a white dress on and the garters are light colored. So you can see the socks and the garters, and that's about it. But there's that. And so he said, "Hazel, you've got them. These are great. I mean, other people are gonna want these." And so she started making them, and since they owned a Morris Variety Store, she was able, they were selling them. You could only get them at Morris Variety Store. people were coming from all over because word spreads, even in the 30s without social media, right? Word got out there, you got to go get these garters for your children. And then eventually they found a wholesale marketer in the cities. And then also, if you remember Woolworths, how many of you remember Woolworths? Yep, they picked it up too. So they would, they started selling them wholesale to regional places. So then we're approaching we're kind of starting to get towards the Depression era, and they couldn't keep the store afloat. However, they couldn't keep the store afloat, so they sold the building. That means they had to move out as well. So they moved into the La Grande Hotel. So if you saw the little slideshow loop before we started talking, you saw a picture of the La Grande Hotel, and it was just right over here where Suade on Pacific Avenue, where that is. And so evidently they were able to rent a space on a more permanent basis than nightly, and because that's where they moved. And they continued the Comfort Garter Company, and that became the family's main business. And they hired women to sew in their homes. I don't know, does anybody know Dorothy Rudd? Does that ring a bell? This lady's name is Dorothy Rudd. Anyway, so this is the car that they would deliver kits. They'd put like the little clips and the little hardware pieces and the elastic in these kits. And then somebody, whether it was David or one of the kids or somebody or Dorothy, would take the kits around to the women that would sew at home. And during the Depression, when families were struggling to make ends meet, this was a godsend to a lot of families because the mom could sew these at home, make some extra money, and still take care of the kids at home. So it was really an important business here. And I just love this on the door of the car. And then when Bill and I were looking at this, we were noticing there's a piece of elastic on that goes. So I don't know if they changed their model as time went on or what, but anyway, so David, the dad, the husband, whatever, he thought up a few other elastic products as well, and then he thought of mitten clips, like the string through the coat with the clips on the mittens. So they also sold like garters for diapers and girdles and corsets and stuff like that. By 1940, Comfort Garter had grown too large to continue in their home, and it moved downtown Morris. So the first location, now this is the first time I've seen this term, was in the National Tea Building. Have any of you heard of the National Tea Building? And it would be like right next to what is now Morris and Associates. And it was between City Center Mall and Morris and Associates, which was Citizens Bank, but now they just reconfigured it in the 70s or something. And then the second location is right here in this building, 409 Atlantic Avenue. So most of you probably know where this is. Like, it's just the ELC Fitness is on the other side here, and CDS, and yeah. Well, and then just down here is Family Dollar. I always wondered what was in these buildings in the past. So
There was a cleaning business in that building, I remember in, when was that? 60s.
okay. So some of the ladies would sew downtown in the business downtown, and some would still sew at home, depending on their situation. David River was very, very smart, because as World War II started approaching, he realized that there was going to be a problem shipping rubber out of the Indies, and he bought all the elastic that he could possibly buy up from across the United States. And so during the war years, Comfort Garter was the only company from the East Coast, or I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. It was the only business in the United States supplying children's garters during the war years, because he was forward thinking. After the war years, times were changing. This is the part that just kind of gets under a person's skin. So the Japanese were making inexpensive mittens with clips, and they were importing all of this Japanese stuff. So David Riber and some of the other companies from the East Coast fought Congress to restrict imports, but they didn't listen. But Comfort Garter managed to keep operating into the 50s until tights were popular. And of course, then you got the Japanese mittens that were cheaper, and then you got tights, and your business is kind of over. So this is David and Hazel Riber in 1949, and it's a pretty nice car. She's got a fur coat on, and so I think they did pretty well. Somebody said that their joke was that they built the Morris Post Office because they shipped as much out of there as the post office cost. So their house is on our West Side walking tour. It's number 7 on our walking tour. And this is like the short version of the whole story. So if you want to know, like the house, after they moved out of the La Grande Hotel, they did buy a house and moved into this house. 901 Park Avenue. Troy Goodnow, yes, Troy Goodnow lives there. Yeah. I just was having a mental lapse on his last name.